Callie said is very true. Can God be that good? And it's great when the Holy Spirit challenges, I am that good, and could you be that good? And then your heart dares to believe. And that's obviously a point of real deliverance when that is real and really going on in your heart. Those moments don't come about every week, but when they come, they are huge shifts in a person's life. That person's life, their destiny has just changed forever. And for those that realize that, that's what's just happened to Callie's life. So Callie, we just want to thank you very much for sharing. That should just go straight to YouTube straight away. But no, that's just like, it deserves it though. It deserves it though. It is something worthy to shout from the rooftops at some stage. Last week, you might remember we talked about remember the boat, how people were getting saved and rescued and brought onto the boat. And you think that's a really good thing. And then this insanity of people jumping off the boat, that they were just saved from the ocean and they jump back into the ocean. You're going like, like what's going on? And the fact that that very thing is at epidemic proportions in the body of Christ at the moment begs the question, why? We talked about that last week. And I wanted to talk more on that this week. I want to talk on, if I can, with time permitting, Hebrews 6, Colossians 1, Philippians 3, tying back to Hebrews 12, where we all began. But just to start off with, it is right if you're going to start a race that you know how to finish. I used to be a 400-meter and an 800-meter runner, and the end of the race was quite critical. Setting up for the end of a 400-meter race was the most critical part. That last turn and having enough in the tank to get to the end fast really mattered. The same with the 800. So knowing how to finish was really critical how you started the race. And a lot of people start their Christian journey completely blind in how to finish. I remember back in the year 2000 at the Sydney Olympics, our home Olympics, and there was this one particular lady, Jane Saville, and I'd never heard of Jane before, but I'm sitting watching the Olympics, and it was I think it was a 10K walk. If you've ever seen race walkers, they walk really, really fast. And there's only one rule, and that's you're not to have an illegal gait. And an illegal gait is when both feet are off the ground at the same time. If you do that 3 times in a race, you're disqualified. But anyway, this was her home Olympics, and she trained like at least a decade for this one race. And so she's in the final of the 10K walk, and you got to understand where the race finished. It finished in, I think it was a Sydney Football Park, Sydney Football Stadium, which is just next to the SCG. And there's this massive crowd for the athletics there that day, and everyone's waiting for the first walker to enter through the tunnel down, and then they had to do one lap, and first over the line wins. Okay, now Jane was leading the race, and the whole of Australia, no one had heard of Jane, but all of a sudden they all tuned in because this Australian is now winning the 10K walk, and and everyone's like, they're cheering, and she's about to enter the tunnel, and she's got no one near her, and she's got one lap to do, and she's going to win. She's going to win gold. And who was she now? But you got to remember, she was a South Sydney supporter. She lived locally. She used to go to this very stadium to watch her favourite team. This was her home Olympics. And she's now, you can imagine what's in her mind. She's turning to go into the tunnel. No one behind her, one lap to go, and she wins. Do you know what happened? An official came out in front of her. She's coming down the tunnel with a red paddle. Just prior to this, she'd fouled for her 3rd time. She was disqualified. Entering the tunnel, had one lap to go, and she would have won after 10K, after 10 years of preparation for this one event. She was there, and she got disqualified at the very end. I think an official came up to her and said, "Is there anything I can do for you?" And she said, "Yes, hand me a gun so I can shoot myself." You know, to invest that amount of your time and energy in wholehearted devotion to one thing and then to be disqualified at the very end is absolutely devastating. And I just want to ask you, do you want to invest your entire life, more than her, more than 10 years of hard running, your entire life? Can you imagine investing your entire life and to be disqualified at the very end? And you're not doing it for a piece of gold in front of a crowd. The crowd of heaven and the God of the universe, you're entering a city of eternal glory. To be disqualified at that point is the one thing to never, ever do. If you are going to start this race, you need to know how to finish. This is not an optional thing. You need to be very clear. You need to be very purposeful. You need to be very devoted to knowing what is required to finish. Because this is not just 10 years of your life. If you want to know, she recovered from this. She became very philosophical. She trained for the Athens Olympic and she won bronze. But it will never replace the gold she never won in a home Olympics at a home football game, at a home football stadium. But nevertheless, you're doing this at much higher stakes. The stakes is your soul, the fruit of what you're going to devote yourself to for your entire life. Do not be so unthought through and so careless as to be thorough and careful in other things such as your job, your vocation, and other things in your finances and your house or whatever, and to be neglectful on the most important thing in life. Do you know how you're going to finish? Because it governs how you walk now. It's a good question, isn't it? You know, this modern epidemic that we're having is not new. It's actually occurred in the New Testament times as well, and the book of Hebrews was written for it as well. So I want to read from you now. I'll read from Hebrews 6, if I could now, because there were heaps of people who were Jews who were now no longer following Jesus Christ. They were giving Jesus the flick and they were going back to their Judaism, much as many people, even Christians these days, are doing the same thing. I can't work it out. But in Hebrews 6:1, it says, "Therefore, let us leave the elementary teachings about Christ and go on to maturity." I want to talk about maturity. But how do you become mature? If I said to you, become mature, but there you are, you're mature, well done, congratulations, now we're all mature. Let's just pretend we're all mature, and if anybody treats us as if we're mature, we'll get all upset. How dare they? Which is automatically to prove we're not mature. Anyway, and let's not lay again the foundation of repentance from acts that lead to death, and faith in God, and instructions about baptisms, the laying on of hands, eternal judgment, the resurrection of the dead, and God permitting, will do so. Now, and so Paul says, I want to talk about going on to maturity. Now, I want you to understand from this point, Hebrews 6 all the way to the end of Hebrews 12, which we've done a lot of talking about, Hebrews 12, it is completely systematically connected. It's not a series of disjointed chapters that seem to make sense and were thrown together because it was one subject after another after another. No, it was sequential. It all led up to Hebrews 12. Hebrews 12 was the climax of it all, of understanding how to walk with God, how to finish, how to become mature. Now, and then Paul just throws in this thing, or not Paul, or whoever wrote Hebrews, he says, look, now, you know, it's impossible for someone who's been enlightened, who's really gotten the picture, they've really tasted God, to be brought back to repentance. I think what that's saying is, listen, of all the people that are leaving, you can't bring them back because you're not going to be able to tell them anything they don't already know. They could tell you more stuff about you than you can about them. So what point have you got to prove? What point of persuasion have you got? No, you're going to have to leave them with God. And then he says this thing. He says, land that's rained on constantly, and it produces a fruit for those who have farmed it, it receives the blessing of God. But there's some land that is rained upon, and the only thing it produces is thorns and thistles, and that's in danger of being burnt up. And what Paul's talking about there is, look, if you are a fruitless person, if you're a person that fundamentally is wrapped up in themselves, self-obsessed, then you're going to miss out. You're not going to make it. Point blank. If you've deceived yourself and your religion is simply a religion where you've wrapped around your own selfish desires a religion, and you call it Christianity, and you believe all the tenets and all the correct doctrines, and you believe you're saved and you're washed in the blood and you're born again, but fundamentally you're obsessed in yourself, then you're just that piece of land that gets rained on, and it just produces thorns and thistles, offenses, unforgivenesses, selfishness, and a taker and not a giver. And then the writer says, but we're really confident that in your case that's not the case, that you're not really self-obsessed. You're not just a taker, you're a giver. And I just want you to understand that God realizes your love and your work and the things that accompany salvation. And I want to make this very clear for all those heresy hunters that might want to just nail me to the wall here. If you ever get a hold of this, this is for you, not for these beautiful people in this community. That you don't work for salvation, but salvation will produce work. There are things that don't produce salvation, but there are things that accompany salvation. You can't produce holiness and bring yourself to Jesus, but you come to Jesus and that will produce holiness. And so when somebody is working for Jesus, it's often the fruit of gratefulness, the fruit of love, the fruit of pure devotion. And the Lord sees that, and that's precious to him. But then I want you to, now I want to pick up back in this. So I've just summarized the beginning of Hebrews 6. And so I just want to pick up the exact words if I could. Even though we speak of these things, dear friends, we are confident of better things in your case, things that accompany salvation. And God's not unjust. He's not going to forget your work and the love you've shown him and have helped his people and continue to help them. So here he's talking about love. And he's talking about work, and he says, look, he sees that. That's the fruit. That's something that accompanies salvation. In other words, rain that falls on the land and it produces the crop, produces love, and it produces work. But rain that falls on a land that produces thorns and thistles, there is no love and there is no work. They're wrapped up in themselves. And so then he says this. He says, now, and we want each of you to show the same diligence to the very end, in order to make your hope secure. For most people brought up under imbalanced evangelical doctrine would automatically, anything that smells of works, then they automatically just want to not hear it. But we've got to hear all the scriptures, things that accompany salvation. There is work. And he says, I want you to show diligence to the very end to make your hope secure. We do not want you to become lazy, but to imitate those who through faith and patience inherit what is promised. Now, if you fast forward to Hebrews 11, you have this cloud of witnesses that's described, where Abraham and the patriarchs who endured and inherited the promise, they were looking for a city whose architect and maker was God. They had their eye on a heavenly city. Therefore, God was not ashamed to be called their God, for he had prepared a city for them. And I talked about Moses, and he was looking ahead to his reward because he was looking to Christ. He was looking towards eternal things. They had people that their eyes were on heaven, and they endured all the way to heaven without actually taking their eyes off that prize. And so here you have, he says, now we want you to imitate those who through faith and patience inherit what was promised. So he's not talking about anybody alive, because he's talking about people who endured to the very end and received the promise. And then he talks about them in chapter 11. And then in chapter 12, he talks about how you're under the hand of God and you're being prepared for this end, and knowing where you're going with it all. You cooperate with it all because you've got your eye on heaven and setting your heart on things above, setting your mind on things above, seeking, building your treasures in heaven, and fulfilling all the scriptures, and understanding what hope is, understanding what faith is, and understanding when it says these three remain, faith, hope, and love, you understand the significance of each word. But in every case, when they're talked about, it talks about patience, endurance, and perseverance. So I want to talk about the necessity of those things in your life, and understanding if you want to finish, you need to understand the significance of faith, but patience and endurance and perseverance, and understand how they are key in bringing you to maturity, and understanding how that works, and understanding how you can do that will make it practical, and not just say you should do this and not tell you how. Okay, is this helpful? I think it's really essential. So now if I jump to that, so therefore in Hebrews, it talks about the need to go on to maturity, the fact that not to become lazy, but that it's through faith and patience and showing the same diligence that you began with to the very end. And that's how you make your hope secure and inherit the promise. And you're given the examples of those in Hebrews 11, how to do that, who did that. Okay, now if I jump now to Colossians 1, and I'll just read you, Paul prays a prayer. We do know this is Paul, and he prays a prayer, and he said, just basically, I pray, this is picking up from verse 9, I guess. I'm praying that God will fill you with the knowledge of his will, with all spiritual wisdom and understanding. And I'm praying this for 4 reasons. And I'm praying this for 4 reasons. And those 4 reasons are so that. And there's big thing for the so that. So basically, you think so. I'm praying that God would fill you with the knowledge of his will, with all wisdom and understanding, that you can really get what God is on about and get on his page and understand where he's going, so that you can really sink in with him and cooperate with him. And he's really going somewhere. And I pray this, that 4 things might develop in your life. And it says, the first one is that you might please him in every way. I think, wow, that's what a goal, to please him in every way. And the next one is to bear fruit in every good work. And then the next one is that you might, sorry, the first one is to live a life worthy of the Lord. I shouldn't fancy leaving that one out. To live a life worthy of the Lord. Now, if you were born of God's Spirit, the gratitude in your heart is that you would want to live a life worthy of this Lord that's taken a hold of you. He's done something beautiful in you, and you'll never be able to pay him back, but you sure like to, wouldn't you? Worthy of the Lord, pleasing him in every way, bearing fruit in every good work, and growing in the knowledge of God, growing to know him. Now, you've got to understand, putting legs on that, Callie's just grown in the knowledge of God. So when you understand how a person grows in the knowledge of God, you understand that's a really beautiful thing. Now, all of those things are really beautiful things. And Paul's praying that all of those things would happen in your life, so that those four things, and he's saying God would really give you a revelation that these four things would happen in your life. Now, if these four things were so that for something to happen, that must be a really significant thing, wouldn't you say? Would you like to know what the so that is? These four things, if you were really growing in these four things, so that, ta-da, so that you would have great endurance and patience. Amazing, isn't it? That all of this should be the very purpose of you being able to have great endurance and patience. Can I ask you this question? Why would he say that? Why would he give such great emphasis as the need for great endurance? Why is it that important? And is it important to you? Later on in Colossians 1, it talks about how you were once far from God and God brought you back. But it gives you the goal of God, as in what his big picture, what he really wants for you, and why Jesus died for you. And it says this, that he basically reconciled you by Christ's physical body through death to present you holy in his sight, blameless, without accusation. There's plenty of people that will be presented holy in his sight and blameless, but have plenty of accusation that still stands. But then it says this: if you continue in your faith, if you continue in your faith, established and firm and not moved from the hope held out to you in the gospel, that you would basically become, that would continue, that you would be established, that you would not be moved from the hope of heaven through Christ, that you would be solid in that. So here you have Paul says, look, I just really pray that you guys get this, and that you would grow in wanting to please the Lord, living a life worthy of the Lord, that you would bear fruit constantly and you'd come to know the Lord. And if you're constantly doing that, then you're going to develop great endurance. And then you'll be able to understand God's purpose is to present you perfect. And God can do that if you continue in your faith, and if you're established and you're firm and you're not moved from that hope. And then Paul turns around and says, well, believe it or not, that's what God is working for in your life, and I am fully working towards the same thing in every person's life I come into contact with. You get some people say, well, I'm an evangelist, I just catch the fish and somebody else cleans them. And I have, because I've only ever heard an American say that, I have to, I'm sorry. If it was a British guy, I'd say it with a British accent, but nevertheless, they have this thing, well, I don't do this. But Paul said, listen, Paul was a great evangelist, but he turns around and he says, we proclaim him. That's preaching the gospel, admonishing and teaching everyone. So Paul proclaimed, he admonished, and he taught, not knowledge, but how to, with all wisdom, so that we could present everyone perfect in Christ. And to this one end, I labor with everything that works within me from God. He had one end, and it wasn't to get people saved. It was that they would endure to the end and they'd end up in heaven. He had no concept of letting people jump off a boat. So Paul, this is the aim that he's talking about. So then if we turn around, if we talk about, well, maturity is God's goal, and Paul's goal was that he would work with people until they became mature and solid and able to endure. Otherwise, what's the point? You need to, and therefore Paul taught people how to finish, not just how to start. And I think the best example Paul has of teaching people how to finish and not just to start is in Philippians chapter 3. And in Philippians chapter 3, he gives you, well, here's my example. He says, this is how I do it. And so he says, well, the goal for him was to become like Jesus. He wants to know Christ. He wants to know the power of his resurrection and how heavenly and spiritual life works, and see people's lives transformed and his own life transformed by the life of Christ working away within him. And he wants to become like Jesus in his death. He wants to grow in meekness, and he wants to become like Jesus whilst he's still alive. Maturity is where you, maturity is where you become, there's a sureness of his character that is proven over time and clarified by experience. Maturity is becoming sure of his character that is proven over time and clarified by experience. And it's where a desire to be conformed to the image of Christ in the inside of your life overtakes and consumes all lesser things, and you have that clarity, and you now know what you want, and you're clear with your purpose of who you serve and what you want to become like, who you want to be. And Paul was very clear on that. And then he says, not that I've already, this is the part where this is how to become mature. He says, not that I've already obtained this, but this one thing I do, I forget what is behind and I press on to take hold of that for which I was taken hold of. And he talked about pursuing that, the prize and the heavenly calling for, and that he's been called heavenwards, and he's got his eyes on heaven, and he's pressing, he's leaning in, he's straining forward towards what's ahead. And then he turns around and says, now anyone who's mature, that's how they think. And I want you to join with those people who think this way and imitate their life. Now, that's really similar to Hebrews 6 that says, imitate people who through faith and endurance inherit what is promised. So he's saying that, and just to give you a bit of legs with this, he's saying the people that you should want to imitate are not your favorite preacher and not the one whose podcast you listen to all the time. It's the ones who you have seen become mature through perseverance, and have given you an example, not a message. That you can imitate their life because you're looking, rather than retelling their truths because you're hearing. I'll give you an example of forgetting what is behind and pressing on to take hold of what is ahead. I'll give you an example. I remember when I was younger, I was sitting in on a marriage counselling session with my parents before it went bad. Things were bad. They were going to counselling, and I was pretty naive. But I was sitting there listening, and the counsellor asked my father if he loved my mother. This was his chance to redeem a marriage. You know what I mean? And you got some men that are dumb, you get some men that are hard, and you get some men that are stupid. And at that moment, my father miraculously was able to combine those three great assets into one moment. And his response killed his marriage. And this is what he said. He says, well, I don't shack up with anybody. And I told her that I loved her when I married her, and I told her that if I changed my mind, I would let her know. Now, I would call that old love that was buried back in the past. And you wonder whether he ever renewed that love any time since the time he thought he loved her. But that was not love. But he thought he loved his wife, and he assumed he loved his wife, like many weary older saints think they love Jesus because they did once upon a time. That's old love. Now, that's not the secret of persevering. That's not persevering. I don't want you to think that an old saint who's lost their first love, but they still believe in Jesus Christ and still believe they're saved. I don't want you to think that that is persevering. That's not persevering. To persevere is to keep your love fresh, forgetting what is behind. Let go of the old love. I don't know about you, but like with my wife, I wake up. Now, my wife can vouch for this. I wake up every day and I recollect, I revisit my thoughts about her. And the first word that comes into my mind is that she is a gift from God to me. I literally realize what a gift. And I start to recount all of her virtues, and it rekindles gratefulness in my heart. It rekindles my love. It refreshes my love. My love is no longer old love. I've forgotten what is behind. I'm not drawing from the bank of the past. I'm making fresh deposits. And my love for her is fresh every day. And I choose to make it so. That is perseverance in marriage. And that's what it is to persevere with the Lord. I hope you're getting this. I hope you're getting this is the secret to marriage. The secret to marriage is commitment. There's that special word, commitment. Now you're meant to know what that is and how to do that. And that's very deep. Commitment. That's important. Oh, hang on. I just got to show you this. There. It's just my wife clowning around again. It's just, in case you're wondering, the sign said gift, and she is my gift. She's a clown, I tell you that. And anyway, she absolutely not. And honestly, she is a gift. And I realize what a gift. And every day it just recenters me on what matters. And she is genuinely like, I know I get it easy because there's a million things to be grateful for. Other guys, they must think, oh, I've got to lie to myself. I've got to invent something that's not true because some way there's got to be a gift in there some way. I don't know. But nevertheless, I recount the ways that she's loved me and the things that I see in her, I deliberately bring them back to mind. Now, if you like, that's using my will. I choose. But it's I do this like cleaning my teeth, and it's not by habit. It's you develop an inward sight, a constancy of choosing, a deliberate focus, a dedication, a resolve, a fixedness of heart, a set in your eyes where you prioritize it, you value it, and so you recenter on it and you refresh your love, you refresh your devotion. This is what it is to persevere. It's not just to hang in there without any resolve, thinking somehow I've decided I'm a Christian, so I'm going to stay a Christian my whole life. It doesn't work that way. Perseverance is a constantly active thing. I really do want you to understand this and take a hold of this, because this is how you become mature. And if you want to know how can I become mature quickly, this is how you can become mature quick. If I could I'll just read this for the sake of time. Maturity is a sureness of his character, proven over time and clarified by experience. It is a continual tempering of your own character till a desire to be inwardly conformed to the character of Jesus Christ overcomes all lesser things. It's a forging of humility, dependence, and meekness inside your own soul. It's a constancy of walking, a lifestyle of purpose, of choosing, aimed in one direction, heaven. It's having very fixed eyes, despite the storms of adversity, the tides of opinions, the winds of change, the challenge of conflict, the fire of persecution, and the tempest, and I guess you could also say the grind of life. And that fixedness of heart or devotion or intent. And it's like if I just switch you across here, can you see in the distance there, you can see my wife's avocado tree. Yes, it is, apparently it's an avocado tree. Personally, I think it's a twig with 4 green things sticking out of it, but my wife assures me it's an avocado tree. It has the potential to become an avocado tree, and it's not kept outside, inside, it's kept outside. And so it's exposed to wind and tempest and the difficulties of seasons and cold and heat. And over time, its trunk will strengthen against the wind, and it will get thicker and it will get thicker and it will get thicker. And as it perseveres, and as it develops resilience to these things, it grows. But that plant has within it a total commitment to growth that is, if you like, biologically hardwired into it. Now, you don't have it hardwired into you. You are a person where God gives you the choice. It is by constancy of choice rather than biologically hardwired that you grow. On that same constancy, being given that same adverse environment, and through choosing, fix it on your prize, where you know who you want to be and you know what you want, and never veering from that. That is what makes a person mature. Now, it's as, I guess you could say, it's as you walk in this, what happens is you end up becoming mature. Mature is the product of walking this way. And God gives you examples around you of people that have walked this way. They're few, but they're there. And he's saying, now look that way and observe that, and you imitate that. It's that constancy. If you're going to finish, you need to know how to finish. You need to persevere. And you need to know what that looks like and how to persevere day by day by day, keeping your love fresh. Not drawing from the bank of yesterday, not having old love, but having a vital and a fresh and a real love in your heart. And so I guess the obvious thing, and that's what is do you have that? Paul said, our goal is to continue in your faith, established and firm, and not move from the hope of the gospel. And so have you developed that within you? High-level feelers, some high-level feelers, you think, man, are they going to still be following the Lord in 1 year's time? They're so thrown around by their feelings. If you've got no hope for them to even last a year, how are they going to make it? Or if you're a high-level thinker and you're wrapped up in yourself, how are you going to make it? Or if you're a high-level doer, how are you going to make it if you don't value love and relationship? Each of us have our own obstacles to this, but the challenge the Lord would like to bring to each of us is to learn to walk with God well. And in Hebrews 12, just before he talks about disciplining his sons, he says this: since we have such this great cloud of witnesses of people who have persevered and have taught us the need to persevere, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race that is marked out for us. Let us fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and the perfecter of our faith. I think there's a good challenge for each of us. You've started a journey. The goal of that is to finish well to the very end. And he who perseveres to the end shall be saved. So make your faith secure, your hope secure, by learning to persevere. Make your love fresh every day. Know who you want to be, know your purpose, and become very fixed and very focused on that one thing. So I pray the Lord, if you have questions, I think it'd be good to write those questions down. I know that talking about perseverance and people get insecure with, can the Lord truly save me? Will I be there at the end? And I think that needs to be done healthily and scripturally. And I know it's easy to deviate from that path, so I'm happy to answer questions. If people want to write emails, that's fine too. I don't want to destabilize somebody, but there is a challenge there for us we should take. So I pray that's helpful. Phil, Jeremy?
Yeah, thank you, Paul. That definitely was helpful, actually. I think I probably don't really need to sum that up, actually. You said everything that needs to be said. So thank you, that was great. Yeah, I think we should let that sink in, to be quite honest. There's a lot there that we could let settle in our spirit quite deeply, I think. So I think let's do that as well. This is our prayer time. So